WVOG Community Radio presents the Windy City Review with your hosts, Queenie Green and Paul Collins.
Alrighty, thank you for tuning in. Once again, this is another episode of the Windy City Review. I am your host, Queenie Green, and my co-host, Paul Collins. Committeeman.
We're hopeful.
Committeeman candidate, write-in candidate. So make sure I've gotta get a little bit of endorsement in for you, Paul. So once again, for those residents in the Ninth Ward, please make sure you write Mr. Paul Collins' name in. That is PaulCollins. He's a write-in candidate, and we definitely feel that he is great for the job. So we have a great show for you guys tonight. Tonight we have
Judge.
I'm sorry, Judge
P. Scott Neville Jr.
P. Scott Neville Jr. C.
We had a disagreement about how the actual pronunciation of your name was, and you just broke it, so
Okay.
You were correct.
C for the first time. So I'm bad with names. I'm horrible with names, and I've been calling you Neville, and everybody else is like it's Neville.
Okay.
And thank you for clearing that up for
correct.
us. So thank you for blessing us with your appearance on the show today.
Well, I'm glad you consider it to be a blessing. It is a blessing to be here this afternoon.
Yes, it's definitely a blessing. This is what I call our history in the making. So
Well, it is history.
let's get right into it,
All
Mr.
right.
Collins.
All right, as always, the views expressed are not necessarily those of Sour Patch Media nor of the Windy City Review. We like to always thank our sponsor, Sour Patch Media, for giving us the opportunity to come to you live broadcasting and having our guest here. This particular guest, this is a revisit. We had some problems before and the judge was not able to make it, so I have some notes from previous. But right before we get into that, we always want to do a little public announcement. We also want to bring out again that Beacon Light Ministries, located at 11034 South Michigan Avenue, burned down, and they are seeking to rebuild. So please, if you have any thoughts about that, please visit Bishop Jerome Powell. He's trying to rebuild the church, and that's a big center of help in our community.
Yes.
Other than that, let's work. And we say judge, but it's actually Supreme Court
Supreme
judge.
Court.
That's correct. In fact, I'm the 117th Justice to sit on the Illinois Supreme Court and the second African American in the court's 200-year history.
Wow.
Can you repeat that?
Yes, I am the 117th Justice to sit on the Illinois Supreme Court and the second African American to sit on that court in its 202-year history.
Right, and you replaced the first one, correct?
That's right. I replaced Charles Freeman. Since this is Black History Month, it might be important to tell the history of that position. It took African Americans 172 years to get an African American on the Illinois Supreme Court. He was sworn in 1990. He served for 28 years. On June 15th of 2018, I was sworn in as the second African American to sit on the Supreme Court, and I've been sitting on the court for the last 20 months.
Wow. So you fulfilled the end session of
I'm completing his vacancy. I'm completing his term. His term was to end December of 2020, so I will be in that position until December of 2020.
and our hope and desire is to re-elect you to that position.
Well, not a re-elect, but to elect.
That's right,
I was
Because
appointed.
you were appointed.
I was
so
appointed,
okay.
so I'm running to be elected to a 10-year term.
Yes, sir. Are there any other people who are trying to run for that position?
Yes, I have 6 opponents.
Really?
Really?
We don't know any of their names, so we don't need to discuss them.
No, we don't.
No, we don't. Today is specifically about
P. Scott Neville
P.
Jr.
P. Scott Neville.
Jr. That's the
Neville
only name you
Jr.
need to know for Illinois Supreme Court Justice.
And my punch number is 162. It's a vote for you.
I like that.
162,
is
a vote for you. Now, what I would love to go ahead and, before Paul goes into the key points that he has, please, can you please drop those credentials? Because when I met you for the first time over at the judicial breakfast, your reasons and your qualifications are immaculate. So, can we give the people that list? Because that list of qualifications, I mean, it was immaculate.
Okay, well, let me start by saying I am a native Chicagoan. I was born at 501 East 33rd Place, which is where Lake Meadows now stands.
Yes,
of
sir.
course, Lake Meadows was not there when I was born. I have lived most of my adult life in Bronzeville. Timuel Black, a black historian, refers to Bronzeville as sacred ground.
Yes.
That's the area between 26th Street on the north, 63rd Street on the south, Cottage Grove on the east, and State Street on the west. I was educated in Bronzeville. I went to Forestville Grammar School and I graduated in DuSable High School. So I have a lot in common with the first mayor of the city of Chicago, Harold Washington.
Harold Washington.
He too was a graduate of Forestville Grammar School and DuSable High School. Well, after graduating from high school, I went on to college and I graduated from Washington University School of Law in St. Louis, Missouri. For the first 25 years of my legal career, I was a practicing appellate lawyer. In fact, in 1974, I became the first African American man to ever clerk for an Illinois appellate court justice.
Wow.
After practicing law, after completing my clerkship, I then went into the general practice of law, where I handled primarily appeals. I was often referred to as a lawyer's lawyer. Lawyers often need lawyers to prosecute their appeals.
Definitely.
So after prosecuting appeals for a number of lawyers and representing a number of clients in the state and federal courts, I was then appointed to the Circuit Court of Cook County in October of 1999. I was elected in November, and I went on to serve on the Circuit Court for 4 years. During the 4 years I was serving on the Circuit Court, I tried over 100 jury trials to verdict. After serving on the Circuit Court for 4 years, I was elevated to the Illinois Appellate Court. And I served on the Illinois Appellate Court for 14 years, where I authored over 1,400 opinions, Rule 23s, and summary decisions. On June 15th of 2018, I was elevated to the Illinois Supreme Court, and that's where I've been sitting for the last 20 months, year and 2 months. Actually, year and 8 months.
8 months.
Okay.
Yes. So on the Supreme Court, I've authored 15 opinions, 2 dissents, 1 special concurrence, and I've authored a landmark case. It's called People versus Buffer. In People versus Buffer, the Supreme Court was presented with the question of whether or not a juvenile, that's a person under 18, who commits a crime, is convicted, and receives a sentence which exceeds 40 years, whether or not a 41-year sentence is a de facto life sentence. In the opinion, the court held, and I authored it, that any sentence that exceeds 40 years that's given to a person under 17 years old is a de facto life sentence, and it violates the 8th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The Appellate Lawyers Association hosted the Illinois Supreme Court on Wednesday, and at my table I had 3 representatives from the Illinois Attorney General's office. The representatives from the Attorney General's office advised me that the office took a poll on their most significant cases and considered People versus Buffer my case to be the most significant case, criminal case they handled in 2019.
Okay.
Wow.
And I can see why that would be such a monumental case. There's a lot going on with our juveniles and everything else. One of the things I have is I did a little research on you, and I have, now this is going to go way back. I have an article from the Chicago Defender, and it was by Tia Carol Jones, dated October 11th, 2019. And it said, per you, I have been practicing law for 25 years. I did not feel the scales of justice were always balanced. By balanced, I mean I didn't always think the court's decision were always based on the facts and the law. And I thought it would be helpful for me to become a judge to return the courts to my vision of what I thought it should be, and that's equal justice for all. So from that article, you're still fighting for equal justice for all, correct?
That's absolutely correct. I've often said, excuse me, that like Martin Luther King, I believe that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. My moral compass also bends towards justice, and it's guided by my North Star is the due process and equal protection provisions in the 14th Amendment. And of course, the due process clause provides that no person will be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process, nor denied equal protection of the laws. And that's something I've been fighting for. You know, I point out in a video on my website that you can have a fair system, but you have to fight for it every day.
Yes.
And that's what I've been doing during my entire judicial career.
What's your website, sir?
It's NevilleForJustice.com.
Okay, so
That's NevilleForJustice.com.
NEVILLE. And is it the FOR?
For Justice.com.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Now, what I'd like to touch on is something that you kind of want to piggyback off that. I've asked this with a few other judge candidate guests that we've had, and this is something that I think is very big within the community, and we just like to have your take on it. So within our community, the black and brown, I'd like to say brown and brown, but in our communities, we tend to seem that the system says that we are innocent until proven guilty. But in our communities, when we go in front of the judge, we're treated more as if we're guilty until proven innocent. So as the Supreme Court judge, what's your take on that?
Well, let me just say this. I'm very concerned if citizens come into the courtroom and don't think that they have the presumption of innocence. That is very troubling to me. And it's something that the Supreme Court will need to work on. You know, maybe we'll have to go out and talk to members of the community. But that's precisely the reason that I am very interested in making the court more diverse. By diverse, I mean bringing in all groups, all races, creeds, colors, sexual orientation. I think people would have more confidence in our courts if the courts reflected the community they were sitting in judgment of, you see. And this is something I've been discussing with my colleagues, and I think it's something that we are about the business of attempting to achieve. So, yes, I can understand how that some communities may have that perception. I want you to understand that it's something I'm concerned about and something that we're working on and we will attempt to solve.
Outstanding. I think going along with that, a lot of the times it's not even getting to the courts that affects our communities a lot. A lot of times the things that occur at the level before they get to the judge, and that's dealing with the police departments in particular. There's paperwork that's been given out. Like I came to understand recently, uh, a lot of times police officers don't know the law. They follow procedure that they've been taught. But if those things that they were taught were biased to begin with, there's never a way to countermount that because they don't know what the law is. And so a lot of times they do what they think is right until they get told. So we've had reports where police officers are having their reports rewritten with the help of their supervisor to make them more legal because the initial stops were not legal. Then we have the situation where they're in the lockup, and a lot of things can happen when you're in lockup. And so we've have there are some bad people out there. There are some bad people out there, and we respect and honor the police officers who lay their lives down on the line every day for those people. But there are some who go overboard, and to that end, we paid. I think the state of Illinois, or excuse me, the city of Chicago, not the state of Illinois. The city of Chicago has paid out in 2018. The payout for Chicago police misconduct reached $50 million, and that was in 2018. So obviously there's something that's occurring, and again, it happens prior to getting in front of a judge. And a lot of times they have paperwork that's already been established that establishes their guilt. I think the general populace don't know the law. They don't know their rights either. And so there needs to be a comprehensive training, or at least an instruction, so people know what their rights are. I train my sons every day. We ask, what's your First Amendment? What's your Second Amendment? What's your Third? So they know, and I drill it into them so they know it. But I also teach them, when the police approach you, you say, yes, sir, and that's it. Am I being detained? Then I like to call, they're juveniles, so I like to talk to my parents, or I like to have our attorney be called. Nothing else. Because other than that, anything you say can and will be held against you. Queen?
Well, I think those are excellent instructions for your sons who are juveniles. Let me say this, when you talk about the police and police procedure, that's part of the executive branch. Keep in mind that the executive branch has the responsibility in our society of enforcing the law. The judicial branch is supposed to make decisions as to whether or not the law has been followed. So I prefer not to comment on what the police are doing, because that's a question that might be presented to me, but it's an executive function. Keep in mind that judges often sign search warrants. The executive branch, the police, execute the warrant, you see. In the state system, if a judge were to sign a warrant, the state police, that's part of the executive branch, you see. On the federal system, if a judge were to sign a warrant, it would be a marshal or the FBI. They would execute the warrant. But the executive branch is charged with keeping order and with enforcing the law. The legislative branch is charged with making the law, and the judicial branch is charged with interpreting the law.
Understood.
So each branch of government has a separate function, and this is somewhat of a separation of powers issue.
Understood.
So the police have their function, the legislative branch has its function, and the judicial branch has its function.
Understood.
So, okay, my question, that's understandable. How do we bridge that? How do we bridge where there's a gap with what's going on with each different level by the time it gets to you?
Well, let me say this. I think it's very important to get to the legislative branch, to have them draft or prescribe rules that people in the executive branch, namely the police, are supposed to follow, while enforcing the law. You see, what you should understand and what your listeners should understand is people control everything.
Mm-hmm.
How do people control it? Because people elect the people who are members of the executive branch. If you don't like the way the police are acting, change the mayor and the other people that work, and the alderman and the others that work for him. Let me give you an example. When Harold Washington was mayor, we didn't have $50 million being paid out in police brutality cases or police misconduct cases. If you have the right mayor in office, you can eliminate those problems. So what am I saying? Get up and go vote. So you ask how to correct the problem.
Yes.
That's the solution.
I agree.
If you get the right mayor in, he's going to have the right police superintendent. And he's going to dictate what the police are doing. And if police are violating people's rights, they'll get rid of them. You see, it's not going to even get to court. When Mayor Washington was in, we didn't have those cases. But you also have to shore that up by electing the right aldermen or state reps so that you get it right. I mean, we have a big problem in this country right now. And a lot of people are making the argument that our senators are not forcing the president to comply with the law. If your senator's not doing what you want him to do, get another one. Finally, we get to the judges. If you don't like the decisions your judges are making, don't put them in. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, many lives have been lost and much blood was shed so that we would have the right to vote.
Yes.
See, even though the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution, one of the Civil War amendments, gave us the right to vote, we still needed the 1964 Civil Rights Act so that became a meaningful right.
Can you say that one more time? Because I think people, and I'm not saying any particular age group, a lot of people think this is the way it's always been.
And I think that you're absolutely correct.
So please say that again so they understand that Civil War era gave us the right to vote, but it took all the way until the 1960s.
Right,
for that to be
1964,
effective.
1965 Civil Rights Act. Before we could actually vote in many parts of the United States. So I think I'm concerned, but you're absolutely correct. People think, a lot of people in our community, that these rights that we have always been in existence. They have forgotten that it took 150 years for us to get a black mayor.
Yes.
150
Yes.
years. And then he was only in office for 4 years, and we lost him, and we haven't been in the office for 32 years.
Right.
It took 172 years to get an African American on the Illinois Supreme Court. And since there are 2 African Americans running against me, if we don't make sure that we know who to vote for and don't split our vote, we stand a chance of losing our position on the Illinois Supreme Court.
And that's where I think we all have to stop for a second and stop letting egos beat you out. Like, well, I want this, I want this. Sometimes I think we forget what's best for the community as a whole. What's best for the village. And so, I don't even know who your opponents are, but I know you. I've done the history on you. Your motto, the motto that you've always said, that always stood out to me was, no person will be unseen or unheard.
That's right.
And if you think about how powerful audience listening and audience viewing us, think about what that means. No person will be unseen or unheard. How often is our complaint, we go to the court systems, there's a whole row of us, and they just passing out sentences like left and right. That's not what this man does. That's not what this man has ever done. Cook County Circuit Court, First District Appellate Court, there's a history that we can follow, that everything that you say, you've actually lived and you've done. And
Exactly. And that's what your listeners should do. You've got to go as you have and check out each judge's record. A lot of judges will tell you they're going to do things, but if you check their records and they've never done those things, you can't expect them to get into a new position and all of a sudden change and start doing them. As you pointed out, I have a history. I started when I was practicing law. It continued when I was a circuit court judge. It continued on when I was an appellate court justice, and it's continued on with the Illinois Supreme Court. I always like to say I've been on the battlefield for 45 years.
45 years.
And the battle's not over. You know, I'm still on the battlefield trying to keep the scales of justice balanced. Let me tell you about a few things I've done since I've been elevated to the Supreme Court. There are 5 appellate and Supreme Court districts. When I joined the Supreme Court, 2 appellate court districts did not have blacks or African American on those appellate courts. Now I can report to your listeners that every appellate court district has at least one person of color.